The air hung heavy over the ancient walls of Constantinople, thick with the coppery scent of blood and the bitter tang of fear. Dawn had yet to pierce the horizon, and still the city shivered beneath the distant thunder of drums, a prelude to chaos. In the shadowed corridors of the imperial palace, emperors' most feared and loyal protectors stood like statues of iron and resolve, their axes gleaming in the dim torchlight, their shields a silent promise of violence. These were men who had left frozen fjords and storm-lashed seas to swear fealty to a foreign throne, strangers bound together by loyalty, gold, and the inevitability of war. The streets beyond the palace echoed with the clash of steel and the cries of men who had forgotten mercy. Every echo was a heartbeat, every heartbeat a countdown. The Varangians moved as one, a living wall of vengeance and despair, their axes biting into armor, wood, and flesh alike. Yet even the most disciplined Shieldwall could not halt the tide forever. Rumors of betrayal had seeped into the guards' ranks like a silent poison, and the enemy they faced was no mere mob. They were an unstoppable force, hungry, relentless, and cunning beyond mortal comprehension. Look closely, and you can see the fear flicker in their eyes, not for themselves, but for the empire that had drawn them into this inferno. Every swing of an axe was more than combat. It was a defiance of fate itself. The clang of metal against metal rang like judgment from the gods, and the ground, slick with the blood of the fallen, seemed to murmur secrets only the dead could understand. They fought not for glory, not for honor, but because the code they had sworn to uphold was iron-bound, immutable, unrelenting. And yet, for all their strength and discipline, for all the centuries of tales sung of their valor, none could predict the horror awaiting them. The city that had promised sanctuary would betray them, the empire they served would abandon them, and history would remember not their names, but the monstrous, bloody tableau of their last stand. The Varangian Guard were about to meet the edge of legend, and the story of their brutal defiance will echo through time, whispered in the shadows of empires, in the bloodstains left on walls, and in the haunted eyes of those who survived to tell the tale.
Long before the walls of Constantinople would tremble under the weight of blood and steel, the Varangian Guard had carved their legend from ice and fire. Born in the frozen north, men of Viking stock were drawn by promises of gold, adventure, and a strange loyalty to a foreign emperor whose power seemed as eternal as the sea. They were outsiders in a city of marble and intrigue, yet inside these gilded halls, their presence was absolute, a living embodiment of fear and unwavering fidelity. To the people of Byzantium, they were both guardians and monsters, their axes symbols of protection and annihilation. But even the fiercest warriors cannot escape the shadows of politics. The palace, radiant in sunlight, yet crawling with treachery, concealed whispers of schemes designed to exploit the Varangians' loyalty. Rival generals, ambitious courtiers, and even the emperor himself manipulated their devotion, pushing them toward battles no mortal mind could have anticipated. Each order given was a step closer to the precipice, each command a thread tightening the noose around their fate. History remembers emperors, but rarely those who bore the consequences of their ambition. The Varangians, however, would bear it in ways few could survive. In the weeks preceding the final assault, scouts reported strange movements beyond the city gates. Entire legions shifted with uncanny precision, and rumors of foreign mercenaries, hardened, merciless, and unmatched, reached the guard. The men, seasoned in combat and unshakable in loyalty, felt the first pricklings of unease. Not fear for themselves, but a gnawing dread for the empire that had claimed their swords. They understood instinctively that this was no ordinary battle. This was a crucible designed to test the limits of human endurance, courage, and betrayal. Even within their own ranks, tension festered. The language of the north clashed with that of Byzantium. Oaths were spoken in ancient tongues, while the intricate politics of Constantinople threatened to unravel them. Brothers in arms became strangers in moments of uncertainty, loyalty strained to its breaking point. Every axe sharpened, every shield polished became a prayer, a ritual against the inevitability looming at the city's edge. And so they waited, silent and immense, for the enemy to arrive. The city seemed to hold its breath.
In the shadows, unseen forces prepared to test the limits of these northern warriors, to turn their strength into spectacle, their loyalty into tragedy. Soon, the clangor of axes, the screams of the fallen, and the shuddering cries of a dying empire would converge into a single brutal symphony, a symphony that only the Varangians could attempt to withstand. The gates of Constantinople trembled under the first assault, the ground quaking as war descended like a living storm. The Varangian Guard formed their Shieldwall, a human barrier of iron and bone, every man shoulder to shoulder, every axe ready to bite. The enemy surged forward, a tide of fury, numbers overwhelming, a sea of faces twisted in hatred and desperation. Yet the Varangians did not flinch. Each man was a fortress unto himself, a pillar of discipline and unyielding will, the echoes of northern seas and frozen forests ringing in their hearts. Axes rose, shields clashed, and the air was split by screams that seemed to originate from the very stones beneath their feet. Sweat and blood mingled on the faces of the guard, reflecting torchlight in a grotesque, flickering dance. Every swing, every parry, every brutal strike was choreographed by instinct, honed in decades of relentless combat. But instinct alone could not account for the horror unfolding. Men were torn apart by unseen forces, friends dismembered in the blink of an eye. The enemy pressed relentlessly, their strategy cruel, intimate, and inhuman. Look closer and notice the subtle fractures. Some guards faltered, hesitation in their movements, a brief questioning of fate. This was not cowardice. This was humanity trying desperately to assert itself in the midst of chaos. Each life held a story, each death a whisper lost to history. The clash was more than physical. It was psychological warfare, a test of loyalty, endurance, and the limits of fear. The battlefield became a living nightmare. The metallic scent of blood mixed with smoke and dust, stinging eyes and clogging throats. The cries of the fallen became a chorus of doom, a constant reminder that no shield, no axe could stop the tide forever. The Varangians pushed, countered, and held ground with the fury of men who knew this was their last stand. Yet with each passing moment, the weight of inevitability pressed harder.
And still, in that chaos, moments of stark, haunting beauty emerged. An axe lifted just in time to save a comrade, a shield absorbing the strike that would have ended a life, a silent nod between warriors acknowledging the bond that transcends fear. For all the brutality, for all the carnage, the Guard fought as one entity, a living embodiment of loyalty and defiance. But history, merciless and impartial, was already etching their fate in blood and stone. The sun, now barely a pale disk in the smoke-choked sky, revealed the full scale of the slaughter. The Varangian Shieldwall, once unbroken, had begun to splinter under the relentless assault. Axes that had felled countless foes now met shields that were dented, bloodied, and cracked. Men who had stared down death with unwavering resolve now faltered, their breath ragged, eyes wide with the realization that even the fiercest warriors could bleed and die. The enemy pressed forward with merciless precision, exploiting every gap, every faltering step. Arrows rained like hail, cutting down the brave before they could even swing their weapons. The ground was slick with the crimson remnants of loyalty, each footfall a reminder that the Varangians' code demanded defiance even when survival was impossible. Some fell screaming, others in silence, their final moments a mixture of agony and grim acceptance. Their shields, once symbols of unity, were now broken fragments scattered across the battlefield like fallen memories. Amid the chaos, the psychological toll became apparent. Brotherhoods forged in ice and blood were shattered in an instant. Comrades were torn from one another, leaving men to face the inferno alone. Each fallen friend was a dagger to the heart of those who remained, a reminder that loyalty exacts a terrible price.
The Varangians had become both the instrument of defiance and the witnesses of inevitability. Every strike they delivered, every enemy they felled, came at the cost of another brother's life. And then came the whisper of betrayal, the realization that the city itself would not shield them. Orders were delayed, reinforcements never arrived, and the emperor's promises, once their sacred covenant, dissolved into smoke and ash. It was here, in this crucible of despair, that the full weight of history pressed upon them.
The Varangian Guard were no longer merely soldiers. They were legends in their own deaths, doomed to be remembered not for victory, but for the courage with which they faced annihilation. In this moment, the battlefield became a cathedral of sorrow. The clash of steel, the cries of the dying, and the unyielding roar of the attackers converged into a symphony of despair. And yet, in the midst of ruin, the Varangians held fragments of their honor, swinging axes with desperate precision, shielding one another even as the end approached. Each movement was a testament to human resolve, a flickering light in the abyss, a reminder that even in the face of impossible odds, courage can endure long enough to echo through the ages. The horizon was now a blur of fire, smoke, and steel, the city's walls trembling as though mourning the lives within. The Varangian Guard, once a wall of iron and fury, had been reduced to scattered fragments, each man a storm of defiance against an unstoppable tide. Axes swung with desperate precision, shields raised against the inevitable, yet the sheer weight of numbers, treachery, and circumstance bore down like a hammer upon them. Men who had crossed oceans, endured endless campaigns, and carved their names into the lore of distant lands, now fell one by one, swallowed by chaos. Their cries, half prayer, half defiance, echoed across the bloodied streets, reaching the ears of those who would never fully grasp the magnitude of their sacrifice. Time itself seemed to dilate, each second stretched into eternity as comrades were torn apart, shields shattered, and axes rendered useless against the overwhelming force. Every heartbeat became a drum of fate, each breath a fleeting defiance of mortality. And yet, in those final moments, the Varangians embodied the paradox of loyalty and inevitability. They fought not for victory, they knew it was beyond reach, but for honor, for the oaths they had sworn, and for each other. Amid the carnage, small acts of courage flickered like dying stars. A fallen comrade lifted one last time, a shield blocking a strike meant to claim another life, a voice raised in unbroken defiance. These moments were fleeting, almost invisible to the tide of destruction, yet they spoke louder than any victory ever could. By the time the sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky with fire and blood, the Varangian Guard had ceased to exist as a unified force.
Their shield wall lay broken, their axes still in hands now cold and lifeless, their names absorbed into the shadows of history. Constantinople, for all its grandeur, had witnessed the tragic culmination of loyalty, bravery, and human endurance, and yet it had preserved none of them. The empire endured, but the men who had protected it had vanished, leaving behind only whispers of a brutal last stand. History remembers empires, victories, and kings, but sometimes, in the darkest corners of archives, in the silent halls of forgotten palaces, there are stories of men who fought, not for glory, but for a code, for honor, and for each other. The Varangian Guard's collapse was not merely a military defeat. It was a testament to the cost of loyalty, the cruelty of fate, and the haunting beauty of courage that refuses to yield, even in the face of annihilation. Long after the clamor of battle had faded, Constantinople stood, a city of marble and ambition, indifferent to the blood that had soaked its streets. The Varangian Guard, those men of northern fjords and frozen seas, had vanished into the annals of history, their bodies lost beneath rubble, their names mostly forgotten. Yet their story endures, not in monuments or songs, but in the silent, electric pulse of human memory, a reminder that courage and loyalty often demand a cost too high to measure. Consider the paradox.
Men who had crossed continents, who had pledged their lives to an empire not their own, were consumed not by enemy swords alone, but by the inexorable machinery of fate, politics, and betrayal. Their shield wall, once a symbol of impenetrable unity, became a graveyard of ideals, each fallen warrior a testament to the fragility of even the strongest bonds. And yet, in that fragility, there lies profound beauty, a flicker of humanity resisting the darkness, a fleeting assertion that honor, courage, and defiance are not meaningless, even when swallowed by history. Their sacrifice also exposes the cruel calculus of power. Empires endure, leaders thrive, and wars are remembered in grand narratives, but the men who bleed and die to protect those structures are often forgotten. The Varangians' last stand is a mirror, reflecting both the valor and the vulnerability inherent in blind loyalty. It asks us to ponder, what is the worth of courage when the world may never notice it? What is the value of sacrifice when the empire you die to defend will outlast your very existence?
And yet, perhaps that is precisely the lesson they offer, that true heroism does not demand recognition, that the weight of duty is its own reward, and that the echo of one's defiance can ripple across centuries, long after the bodies have returned to dust. The Varangian Guard fought as men, as brothers, as legends of loyalty forged in ice and fire. Their story, brutal and haunting, endures not in triumph, but in the trembling awe it inspires, the kind that makes us look back at history with reverence, fear, and the chilling awareness of what it truly costs to stand firm in the face of annihilation. So, when you imagine the clash of axes, the walls of Constantinople, and the thunder of human defiance, remember this: the Varangian Guard did not survive the battle, but they survived history itself. And in that survival, they remind us that courage, once lived, can never truly die.